Good evening, everyone. I would like to call this meeting of the Committee of the Whole of the Ottawa-Carleton District School Board to order. And I would acknowledge that we are meeting this evening on the unceded and unsurrendered ancestral homelands of the Algonquin people. We thank the Algonquin Nation for hosting us on their land, and we recognize our responsibility to uphold long-standing traditions of courtesy and care for these lands and all those who share this space. Are there any declarations of interest from trustees? Seeing none, could I have a motion to approve the agenda, please? Trustee Milburn, any discussion on the agenda as presented? Seeing none, I'll call the question on the agenda. All those in favor and opposed, the motion is carried. I turn now to Chair Lyra for her briefing this evening.
Thank you. It is Autism Awareness Month. For those who may have missed Monday's presentation, Neurodiversity to Neuroharmony, it will be available to watch for the remainder of the month through our website. The session focuses on how we can increase the well-being of children, youth, and adults with autism and how we might address well-being in education. Second, we would like to provide a final reminder that the nomination period for our Community Recognition Awards close on Friday. Please help us to celebrate all the amazing volunteers across our school district. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Chair Lyra. Are there any questions for the chair? Seeing none, I will turn to Director Giroux for her briefing.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. A reminder that on April 26th, there will be a public consultation meeting regarding the new secondary school in Riverside South. The purpose of this meeting is to gather community feedback on the proposed boundary and opening grade structure. There is more information on the OCDSB website. For families looking for speech language support, last month the OCDSB speech language pathologist organized a virtual open house for parents and caregivers. And there was a webinar generated, and that webinar provided information and resources about developing children's communication skills. This week in our weekly parent newsletter, we will be sharing a link to that recording. And a reminder to parents that have any questions or concerns about their child's speech or communication skills to contact their teacher for information about additional resources. And a reminder that all OCDSB elementary schools, secondary schools, and offices will be closed on both Friday, April the 7th and Monday, April the 12th. We would like to extend our best wishes to those in our community celebrating Passover and Easter in the coming days. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Director Giroux. Are there any questions for the director? And I'm seeing none, which brings us to delegations. And I would like to welcome all those who have asked to come and address the board in Committee of the Whole this evening. Just a couple of basic things. We do expect, since this is our workplace and we do have work to do this evening, that people will be courteous because we wish to be able to hear everything that you are bringing to us. And with that, I believe all of the delegations presenting this evening have 2 minutes to speak. We'll start the timer when you begin. After you've finished your delegation, there might be questions up to 3 for clarification from trustees. And if that's the case, please try to keep your answer to a minute or less if you have a question to respond to. And with that, I would like to call first on Harry Fisher regarding transgender hate and discrimination, who I believe is joining us via Zoom. Is Mr. Fisher present?
Yes, I am.
Excellent. Please go ahead when you're ready.
Yes, I'd like to speak out on the trend of certain people to advocate against the school board discussing or allowing to have get discussed at school meetings or groups, things like transgender, being gay, or anything like that. And the reason I say so is because if I go back to the 1930s, when my dad was alive, certain groups started speaking out against other certain groups. Okay, and they started off with saying you have to do this and you have to do that. And by the end of the late 30s, there was over 400 regulations that said what Jews could do in Germany. Okay, and that is a thin wedge, because if we turn around and we say we don't want people to talk about being transgender or anything related to that, then what is the next topic we're going to stop? Are we going to stop people from talking about gay, homosexuality, or is it going to be a type of a religion or an ethnic group that we're going to pick and choose? What wedge do we do? I think the school board should turn around and very clearly say, we allow all discussions about anything to happen, because that's what educated people do. They talk, they think, they reason, and they make up their own mind. They do not wait for somebody to tell them what to do and how to do it. Okay, I clearly think that the school board needs to stand up against this. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your delegation. Are there any questions for Mr. Fisher? And I'm not seeing any. Please remember that you are welcome to continue to watch the meeting and listen to the other delegations, and to stay on and hear the business that we are going to be dealing with this evening as well.
Thank you very much.
Moving on, our next delegate is Meral Adouli regarding inclusive schools. Welcome, Ms. Adouli. And when you're ready, please begin.
So though I'm no longer a student of the OCDSB, I have attended schools that fall under this board, one of them being Canterbury High School, an arts high school that was very accepting to Two-Spirit LGBTQ+ students, but the school didn't come without its issues. A year after graduating, a group of fellow graduates and I decided to take action and created a survey for students and alumni to complete. While the survey did touch on intersectionality, our final report only focused on race, how race impacted student treatment. Despite the school mandating an accepting environment for queer students, we found that as a whole, students of minority groups face significant levels of discrimination. Our report was shared with administration and played a role in the efforts to make the schools in the city more inclusive. That's why it's so crushing to hear certain members of the community are now trying to undo the progress that this board has committed itself to, seeing as how it was work like mine that helped bring about these positive changes. Objections to gender-neutral bathrooms bring up outdated, trite claims, painting trans people as some kind of sexual deviance, while simultaneously alleging to be protectors of women. However, cisgender women's issues are interconnected with those of trans people and cannot be considered separately. The main concern expressed by those objecting progress is that predators could take advantage of gender-neutral bathroom policies and commit assault, but a sign on a bathroom door doesn't prevent someone from committing an act of violence. Perpetration of sexual violence by youth is often associated with peer aggression, exposure to pornography, and most of all, norms that condone boys' perpetration. If opposing community members truly cared about safety, they'd recognize that gender neutrality is actually a very important step towards solving sexual violence, and that sexual violence perpetration programs should challenge toxic gender and sexuality norms. But rather than standing up against that which we have accepted to be normal and focusing their energy towards implementing policies and creating educational programs that challenge harmful beliefs and behaviors related to gender and sexuality, opposing parents have let their fear of trans people prevent them from actually taking meaningful steps to protect their children. We have all probably shared a bathroom with a trans person without knowing it and without facing any issues. I just hope the board continues promoting gender neutrality, as that's what's going to lead us to a future with lower instances of gender-based violence. Thank you.
thank you very much for your delegation. Are there any questions for this delegate? Would you please sit down and be quiet or leave? Thank you. So are there any questions for this delegate? And I'm not seeing any questions. So thank you again for your presentation. And as before, you are very welcome to continue to stay and listen. Moving on then to our next delegation, Mia Laverne, regarding issues faced by transgender students, coming to us via Zoom. Welcome, Mia.
Hello, hi. Right, so I come here to this meeting as an elementary school education worker who takes care of school children during hours outside classes, like mornings, before classes, lunchtime, And so I'm also a substitute, so I often get a lot of different classes. And I'm here to talk about an experience I've had recently with a girl who I'll call Riley as a pseudonym to protect her identity, who walked up to me during recess, pointed at my purse with my pride pins and asked me if I was also transgender. And I, of course, said I was, because I don't hide the fact I'm trans. However, I only really let them know if, they ask me. And the first thing she told me afterwards was, in a very excited voice, I was also born a boy, and I want to be a girl too. And as she said that, I put my hands on her shoulder, told her, we're already girls. We're beautiful, and we're beautiful ones at that. She gave me the biggest hug I've ever received from a student so far. And I want to tell the story to show that transgender students exist throughout our schools, and these attacks on transgender students really do affect the mental health of real students who have, real lives, like normal lives like any one of us, and who deserve to be treated with respect and not worry about people coming in and disrespecting who they are and taking away the childhood and joy that they have living as who they are. This is for the students of our schools, and this girl who was happy to see someone like her, was happy to be who she was. I just here because I'm worried that might be taken away if we keep letting these people who are against the inclusion of trans people in schools speak out the way they do, especially in violent protests recently. Thank you for your time.
And thank you very much for your delegation and for the suggestions you included in your written submission. Again, please feel free to continue to watch the meeting as we proceed. Our next delegation is Faye Johnston, regarding accelerating inclusivity, also coming to us via Zoom. Do we have Faye Johnston? Yes, there she is. Welcome. Please go ahead when you're ready.
Hello, and thank you so much for having me today. Thank you, Trustee Scott, for hosting and holding space today. And it is an honor and pleasure to be here and to follow such phenomenal delegates whose courage and wisdom is humbling to me. And I just want to take a moment to appreciate and amplify everything that they have shared. My name is Faye Johnstone. I am a trans woman and an advocate for queer, trans, and trans people's rights. I am a former OCDSB student who went to Colonel By Secondary School in out east. And in my work, I lead a consulting firm named Wisdom to Action that specializes in gender and sexual diversity. I'm also joining today as a member of the board of directors of YWCA Canada, Canada's oldest and largest feminist organization. I want to start by saying that I am tired. I am tired of hate, and I am tired of our communities being neglected. I am tired as one of the few trans people in Canada with a platform in the media of having to defend the basic human rights and dignity of and well-being of my community. I am joining today to encourage this board to accelerate efforts on 2SLQI+ inclusion. I did not want to come here tonight. I don't want to be rehashing debates that we settled in the early 2000s, but amidst rising hate, defending the progress we've made and calling for further leadership on queer issues is not optional. The mental health and well-being, the safety and basic dignity of trans and queer people is at stake. In 2021, we saw a 64% increase in hate-motivated violence targeting our communities. There are efforts underway across this country to roll back inclusive policies and supports for trans and queer young people and communities. Despite what anti-trans stakeholders allege, our schools are not safe. Evidence from Egal Canada, Canada's queer human rights organization, proves all too well that our young people are still unsafe in their classrooms, in their hallways, and in their schools. And these youth deserve better, just like I believe I deserved better when I was a student at Colonel By and graduated in 2013. I am proud as a former student to describe the OCDSB as a role model for inclusion when I connect with educators and boards across Canada. From the Rainbow Youth Forum to trans inclusion coordinators to supports for GSAs, the OCDSB has proven its leadership. Now is not the time for us to rest on our laurels. I want to highlight that in times of adversity, QSLQI communities need our school boards to speak out. Now is the time to accelerate efforts for inclusion in our schools. And so I encourage this board to not hesitate, to not step back or worry, but to lean into the fight for queer and trans rights, because our students deserve no less and lives are at stake. Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you very much for your presentation. And like those who preceded you, please feel free to continue to watch the meeting. There will not be any issues related to this subject on our agenda for debate this evening, but you are certainly welcome to stay and watch us as we do our other work.
Thank you so much.
Moving on then to our next delegation, I would like to welcome Melissa Bunn regarding choices for transgender and non-binary students. And I believe this is also a Zoom delegation.
Am I being called in? Sorry.
Melissa Bunn.
That's correct. That is me. Hi, I'm here simply to request the board to enhance their guidelines or policies or even training for staff and teachers to better support trans kids, non-binary kids, and kids that are gender creative, especially in the K-6 schools. I'm going to speak from just a personal experience to give an example of how this could be improved. I have a kid that is in grade 3, and there are 2 grade 3 classrooms at my kid's school. They prefer to use a washroom that is a single stall bathroom. It's where they feel most comfortable. They are quite far from that bathroom in the class they're currently in, and so they're choosing to hold their chance to use the washroom until school is over. And that has led to pretty significant urinary issues and health this year. The issue is that the other grade 3 classroom happens to be directly beside the single stall washroom. I completely understand that teachers get really frustrated when kids take a long time to go to the bathroom. And I completely understand the load on administrators to assign kids to classrooms that are close to bathrooms that suit their needs. But I do know that if there was a bit more training and guidance and support for teachers and staff, and especially if parents like me were able to give some feedback to how that training worked, there'd be kids like my kids who would not only have a better educational experience, but be in better physical health because they're able to have their needs met at school. And that's all I wanted to say. So thank you.
And thank you very much for raising that issue. Certainly, I would strongly suggest that if you have concerns about your particular school, perhaps we could ask staff to follow up with you offline following this meeting at some point, just to see what could potentially be done to resolve those issues. Otherwise, yeah. Please.
And more as a school-wide issue, because I know as parents of kids dealing with this, we have a million people that we have to reach out on a lot of issues. So something as simple as a policy or guidance on this issue would be a lot of help for kids and parents.
Thank you for that suggestion. Now, are there any questions from trustees? And I'm not seeing any. So again, please feel free to continue to watch our meeting and hear the rest of the delegations and the work we'll be doing later. Thank you very much. Our next delegation is Megan Wiper regarding lack of resources in schools for students on the asexual spectrum. Welcome, Megan.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Megan Wiper. I'm here to request the board to provide more resources in the budget for students on the asexual spectrum. Like most asexual people, I wasn't taught about asexuality. As a result, I didn't even discover my sexual orientation until I was 42 years old. I will be 46 in 4 days' time. That means I've only known who I truly was for only the last 4 years of my life. Even the current Ontario sex ed curriculum makes no mention of asexuality, leaving yet another generation of students feeling like they're broken inside and erased. I don't want that to happen to anyone again. Those currently discovering their asexuality don't have a safe space to do so with valuable resources. They're forced to go on the internet and social media, thereby subjecting themselves to not just misinformation, but oppression Olympics, where we are gatekept because of the misconception that we're not oppressed. In fact, asexuality was listed in the DSM as a mental disorder until 2013. In Russia, asexual people are banned from getting a driver's license because it is a mental disorder there. Though thankfully it's legal in Canada now, we're often at great risk of undergoing conversion therapy worldwide and are often victims of corrective rape. The portrayal of asexuality in the media has been patchy at best due to erasure and aphobia, or the fear and of asexual people. For every BoJack Horseman, there is a House MD episode where asexuality is portrayed as some sort of illness. Also, there's a whole issue of Jughead in Riverdale where his asexuality has been erased and retconned. So what is the school board to do about that? Provide more money in the budget towards speakers. Books like Angela Chan's Ace, What Asexuality Reveals About Desire, Society, and the Meaning of Sex ed courses that are inclusive of asexuality. That way to discover the truth far sooner than I did and don't feel broken. Thank you.
And thank you very much for your delegation. Are there any questions for Megan Wiper from trustees? And I'm not seeing any, and thank you for including some suggestions in your written delegation. Our next delegate is Sandra Fong regarding student safety. Welcome. And please go ahead when you're ready.
Hi, thank you so much for allowing me to speak. I'd like to, in my speech, bring 2 examples of incidents that have happened with bathrooms in the last couple of years with other schools in other districts, to hopefully use it as a cautionary tale. In Culloden Castle School in West Midlands, a 13-year-old girl was taken to the hospital when a boy in a unisex bathroom kicked the door open and the door hit her head. Apparently this was an incident that was leading up as none of the locks in that unisex bathrooms were working because boys very commonly would break the locks of them as they tried to get pictures of girls. Another incident was in Laundry County in Virginia, where a girl was sexually assaulted by a 15-year-old boy in a girl's washroom that wasn't single sex. When her father, Scott Smith, brought it up to the school board would not listen to him. The superintendent lied and thankfully was later fired for his lie. But because they tried to cover it up, this 15-year-old boy was allowed to go to a different school and then continued to sexually assault a second girl because of that. The reason I bring up these 2 examples is because neither of these boys were trans identified. These were just biological boys, and that is the issue. It's not about being trans, it's about being male. And especially in schools where the maturity level has not been reached yet, and they do not have the long-term consequences ability in their brain, it is a recipe for disaster. Less than 140 years ago, the first women's public bathroom opened up, and they didn't become commonplace until World War I. Before this was widespread, women's public bathrooms, women can participate in public life. And I urge you, when you make these policies that cause these incidents to happen, that you please consider the impact it has on women and girls and how it affects male violence. Thank you.
Are there any questions from trustees? And again, I am not seeing any, and you are also welcome to stay and hear the remaining delegations and the rest of our business. Our last delegation is Samuel Risotto regarding transphobic ideologies and rhetoric. Welcome, Mr. Risotto.
Hello. So it's our collective responsibility to ensure that these spaces remain productive, safe, and focused on the betterment of our education system. Unfortunately, we have witnessed an abhorrent misuse of public delegations that some individuals have chosen to habitually use and seek to exploit these platforms to incite hateful and bigoted ideologies. The very essence of public delegations is to allow voices to be heard, to foster constructive dialogue, and to create positive change. However, it is crucial that we recognize when this privilege is being exploited by those with malicious intent. It is essential that stronger public policies are implemented to limit public delegations to individuals with a genuine vested interest in our education system. Approximately 95% of OCDSB schools now have at least one all-inclusive washroom. Schools without such facilities are on a list and will be prioritized soon to be retrofitted with one. Schools are meant to be a safe haven for students where they can be themselves and focus on their academic growth. In some cases, schools may be the only place where a student feels safe and accepted. We must stand together against transphobia and other forms of discrimination, as they have no place in our schools. We must establish stricter eligibility prerequisites and barriers to prevent harmful ideologies from ever taking root in our public delegations. The OCDSB has the power and duty to champion human rights in guidelines and policies, using its framework to develop policies that prioritize student safety and maintain a secure environment for all. As Sam Hirsch rightly pointed out, this is not and has never been a matter of bathrooms. It is a matter of dignity, respect, and fundamental rights of every individual. Let me be perfectly clear that those who choose to come to our public delegations to interject hateful views are not only misguided, but also stand on the wrong side of history. Together, we must strive to create an all-inclusive and nurturing environment for all students, regardless of their gender identity, race, or background. And it's time for OCDSB to take a firm stand and lead by example to send a powerful message that this will not continue, and the OCDSB will not tolerate hatred or discrimination in any form. Thank you.
Our delegation this evening as well. Are there any questions for Mr. Risotto? And I'm not seeing any questions. For those who may be interested in staying, we have heard what you have said, and our staff who are here this evening have also heard what you've had to say. We are not contemplating any action or debate on these topics this evening, but what the constructive suggestions and concerns that we have heard will be followed up as our staff particularly proceed with their work of implementing the policies we already have with regard to human rights and safe schools. So thank you all very much for your delegations this evening. And if you wish to stay and listen to us talk about modernizing our policy review process, modifying our governance structure with regard to the Student Senate, and whatever the last thing was, the approval of policy changes with regard to the membership of the Special Education Advisory Committee, feel very welcome to stay and hear our debate. Thank you all very much. Moving on with the agenda then. Our next item is matters for action, beginning with report number 23-025, policy review update. Madam Director.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and happy tonight to have before the board, I think the first time for this board, Report 23025, which is a report on the policy review process. This is an initiative that started with the previous Board of Trustees and has allowed us to take a look at our policy making and updating process and try and make some changes to practice that allow us to be, I think, more readily able to update and respond to policy changes and better in position to support the board. Executive Officer McCoy and Manager Guthrie and the policy analysts have been doing a tremendous job of continuing this work. And I'm going to turn things over to Executive Officer McCoy. And I'm not sure if Manager Guthrie is staying in her current seat or moving to the presenter seat or presenting from her current seat. Very well. Over to you, Executive Officer McCoy.
Thank you, Director, and Manager Guthrie has indicated that she is certainly available to answer questions this evening, but given her dual role, I'll be presenting the report. But do want to acknowledge, as the Director did, the extensive work that Manager Guthrie and the policy analysts have done to bring us to this point. As indicated in the report and as the Director outlined in her opening remarks, this report follows a work that actually commenced with the previous board. And specifically as a result of some significant policy work that was undertaken over the last couple of years, both in terms of the development of a couple of very substantial policies, as well as revisions to existing policies. And that work revealed a need to for the board to consider alternatives in terms of the way that it moves forward with its policy work. As we know, the development and approval of revisions to existing policies is an important function of the board. And so it's important that we, as staff and the board, take opportunities to review the process that has been in place and to see what we can put in place to support that important work. So as indicated in the report, the work to reconsider how we approach policies started with the board senior staff retreat last April, and we have provided the aid memoir that summarizes the discussion that took place at the retreat, including the backlog of policy reviews. In May of last year, the board approved changes to the existing policy P001, which established a tiered approach to policy development. And what that means is that the approach that's taken in terms of the level of consultation that occurs is really dependent on the scope and the complexity of the work that's being undertaken. So tier 1, for example, refers to minor revisions that correct inconsistencies or that harmonize definitions. So minor revisions, and through the policy revision that was undertaken last spring, the authority to make those minor revisions was actually delegated to staff. And so that work has been happening. On the other end of the continuum, tier 3 policy reviews refer to more complex and substantive policy development work, which would include the development of new policies or substantial revisions to existing policies. And the again, the extent of the consultation, the way in which that work is undertaken is determined by the tier that the policy work falls under. I just want to highlight, as the report did, some of the policy work that's been undertaken over the past year. And I think it's important to recognize that this work was facilitated by the changes that were made to the policy. but also was undertaken in the context of some other significant work that's been ongoing this year that involves or falls within the portfolio of many of the same staff. So, for example, the work that's been undertaken around the orientation as well as the development of the strategic plan. So notwithstanding that other significant work this year so far through the Tier 1 review process, over 11 policies have been updated to reflect the new policy template and to ensure that the language has been modernized and that definitions have been harmonized. There have been several Tier 2 policy reviews that have been undertaken, a couple of which are on tonight's agenda as well. In addition, with the support and work of the policy analysts, an equity assessment tool has been developed and is being implemented to help guide the policy work that is underway. A generic email account was established to facilitate the consultative process on each of the policies that are being reviewed, and other communication channels for input using the website, et cetera, have been improved. So this evening, what we're bringing forward for approval by the board is an alternative model for approaching our policy work. In a report that was provided last fall, staff identified and presented for trustee discussion 3 proposed options for approaching policy work, and those options were identified based on looking at how other boards across the province approach the work. And each of the different options was explored, and there was a chart provided to kind of provide an overview. Through the discussion that occurred, there was no real consensus reached by trustees in terms of which approach would be the most appropriate for the OCDSB. After having had an opportunity for further consideration and to look at how we might go forward, staff is bringing forward a proposal this evening that would that hopefully provides trustees with a way forward in terms of the policy development. We have included in the report for information a description of 2 of the options from the report last fall. One being the establishment of an ad hoc policy review committee, and the other being a committee of the whole policy committee that would operate very much as this committee does and the budget committee. You can find an outline description of both of those options is provided in the report. At the end of the day, after considering both options, staff is recommending the adoption of the ad hoc policy committee approach for several reasons. First, we think it provides the board with an opportunity over the next year using this approach to assess how a separate committee that looks at policy will operate. The ad hoc committee provides flexibility in terms of the workflow and how committee meetings are scheduled. It would also provide the ad hoc committee with an opportunity to assess through a number of indicators that are set out in the report whether or not that model is meeting the needs of the board. And to look at what changes might be required moving forward to either refine that model or to come back with changes. So the ad hoc committee would consist of up to 7 trustees, and the mandate of the committee is provided in Appendix D of the report, but would essentially be a committee that would have primary responsibility for looking at policies at their initial stage. So in the case of new policies, for example, staff would be bringing forward initially to that committee the rationale for the new policy, having a discussion with the committee about what the some of the policy options might be around a particular topic, then bringing back once staff has had a chance to further consult with internal and external stakeholders, a draft policy for consideration by the ad hoc policy committee, and to then get it to a point where it would come forward to the committee of the whole through the usual reporting mechanisms from ad hoc committees to this committee for consideration by committee of the whole before new policies or policy revisions went to the board for final approval. As I said, it would provide the board with an opportunity to also evaluate and monitor the effectiveness of the alternative policy review model. And we have suggested some indicators that could be used for that review. In addition, it would provide the ad hoc committee with an opportunity to have input into and discuss with staff the policy work priorities that would help to inform the annual work plan related specifically to policy work, and to then ensure that the policy work that we know needs to happen is continuing to move forward. Just wanted to highlight as well that in terms of looking at the work that would happen next year, board services through the policy analyst is in the process of engaging with each of the members of senior staff around the policies that fall within their various portfolios, identifying those policies which based on what board priorities are, what each of the senior staff anticipates will be coming up in other areas, to identify what policy work will be might surface next year, so that we can come up with a plan that will ensure that over the course of the next year we are again continuing to move policies forward using the tiered approach that's outlined in the current policy. With that, we have brought forward again recommendations for moving forward with this, and both Manager Guthrie and I are happy to try and answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you very much, Executive Officer McCoy. And I do have a speakers list here, which currently includes Trustee Lyra, Trustee Blackburn, Trustee Aziz, and Lily Miller. So beginning with you, Trustee Lyra.
Thank you. So I'd like to open by putting a recommendation on the floor that the OCDSB adopt option 2 for our policy review model. Can I have introduction?
And do we actually have wording for that?
That the OCDSB adopt the committee of the whole policy model for our cyclical policy review model. Yes, it is the word model in there twice.
Perhaps we could take about a 2-minute recess and you can sort out the wording. And then we can have it clear and on the screen so we know exactly what we're talking about.
Sure.
So I declare a recess of about 2 minutes here. If trustees could please take their seats. We have language and we're ready to begin again. So let's go back to the beginning again, trustee Lyra.
If we could put it on the screen for everyone to see, that would be very beneficial. That's not what we discussed. That's not what we
I thought
discussed.
that it was only the first part that you were moving.
Also, that's not the
Oh,
motion.
that hasn't been moved on the floor. It's only the new motion that we. would
Yes,
have.
I'm looking for the new motion up on the screen so everybody can read it.
It's the language that you have here that we need.
Thank you.
Yeah, and just to be very clear, this is not an amendment to the motion that's in the report. This is a motion that stands on its own 2 feet because there was no previous motion on the floor. So go ahead with your introduction, please, trustee Lara.
So I am moving that the board establish the committee of the whole policy model as set in option 2 in report 23-025. I'm bringing this forward because having weighed the pros and the cons of the 2 options outlined, I really think that the option 2 pros outweigh the cons. And when I look at what we lose by adopting a model that doesn't have our non-voting representatives, it doesn't have the recommendations from ACE, it doesn't have the recommendations from IAC, I think we lose the voices that we need, those second thoughts, the people who are going to be making recommendations, they volunteer their time to give suggestions to the system. I think that by putting this in the committee of the whole policy framework, we ensure that the voices from special education, from OCASC, from PIC are heard, because we sometimes need advice from other people. And I hear the concerns that it's going to be additional work to make sure that we engage with this model, but I think we have to do that work. I think we should do that work because we need to hear from the people who are going to be impacted. And for those reasons, I am of the belief that the committee of the whole policy model is better than the ad hoc committee. And for that reason, I have moved the following motion. Thank you.
Thank you, trustee Lyra. I think that it's probably going to be easiest to stick to the original speakers list that I had. And so I will go next to trustee Blackburn.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you. I will not be supporting this motion. If it fails, I would hope that we would support the staff recommendation. It is my view that we will not lose if we vote against this and go to the staff recommendation, that we will lose the voice of all the people that trustee Evans mentioned. They will still attend committee of the whole. Any policy changes will still have to go through committee of the whole, and then they will have to be passed at board. Nothing will change in that regard. Adding another night that takes away from our senior staff, it takes them away from their families till very late. In addition, it is very common that this board has difficulty indeed passing policies in a timely fashion. That night is required sometimes to do other things. This board well knows that the open Tuesday night right now is often used for very important work that needs to be done. It is my view that it is the Board of Trustees who should take responsibility for the fact that we're backed up in policy. The staff recommendation and the makeup of the committee indicates that it can be up to 7 trustees, but I would remind my colleagues that if you aren't in fact appointed to the committee, you are, like every other committee, more than welcome to attend. I have a question of clarification. Through you, Madam Chair, to the director, would these meetings be open to the public?
So the committee of the whole policy meetings or the
No,
ad hoc committee?
If we had an ad hoc committee.
The ad hoc committee would be accessible to public, yes.
Thank you. So it is my view that out of respect to our staff, that we vote against this, and nothing is being taken away, I repeat, from our very valued stakeholders. They will still be able to participate, and it is essential that we get caught up in the backlog of the policies that are before us. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Trustee Blackburn. Moving on to Trustee Aziz.
Thank you, Chair. I want to double check before I begin that the folks in the room can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Thank you. I want to express my support for the motion on the table or on the screen, I guess, this evening. I think there are a number of important considerations on the table this evening when it comes to considering, I think this is called a tier 2 or option 2 approach to a policy review. I think this is a timely discussion. I think I heard at another board meeting, a member of the public raise her concern that some of our board policies start with the year 19. And I think that highlights the need for us to take the time we need to make the appropriate policy updates and not rush any of these important discussions. I want to highlight a few reasons I'm going to be supporting this motion. One being what has already been described by Trustee Lyra, that the importance of having voices at the table who will be affected by our policy changes is essential. If we're a board that values equity, if we're a board that values diversity and inclusion, including the way that we title our reports, valuing voices. If we do truly value the voices of those affected by these bills, oh my goodness, policies and procedures, we need to make sure that members of our community affected most are having a say in those conversations. I'm looking also in the staff report and looking at some of the concerns raised by staff in terms of staff resources. If we were to take on the ad hoc approach, I'm concerned that a crunch timeline would stretch our staff, especially in times of concern regarding budget, regarding resources writ large. And so I think giving us this time and space to meet monthly can also give staff time to think things through and share conversations with the public and consult with our members appropriately. And I want to also talk about discussions, like high level discussions that need to be had on our guiding principles, especially when we think of the new strategic plan that will be coming to the board in coming months. I think those concerns need to also be, considered in these discussions. So I will be supporting the motion on the screen. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll go to Lily Miller for the Indigenous Education Council.
I'm here. Hi. I hope you can hear me. Very much in support of Lyra's motion. It can be definitely time consuming to hear different voices and debate changes to policy. But I hear that, yes, there's pressure to want to do this quickly, but it's more important to do it properly. And it's important to have voices at the table, Indigenous, ACE and SEAC and other voices that can put the lens that, I understand there's a tool, an equity tool that can be applied, but that can't replace our voices. And I see that in tier 2, it's the tier 2 model is concerning because it, other than posting on the web page and then just proceeds to cow just through the minutes and recommendations, it that kind of fast tracks the review. But I have a question about the tier 1. Where can I find those that have gone through tier 1 and not through any public review? Thank you.
Madam Director, answer to the question.
Any tier 1 policy work that has been done has been reported to the board by way of memo, and those memos are listed on the district website. They're available publicly, and they will be known as tier 1 policy review updates. So I think there are 2 or 3 that have been done.
Thank you, Director.
Thank you. I just wanted to just mention that for those tier 1, just making those available to our community and equity groups, just so that we can have, perhaps there is a lens that has not been applied. So just wanted to mention that.
Thank you very much, Ms. Miller. Moving on next to Trustee Kaplan-Murphy.
Thank you, through you, Chair. I would also like to support Trustee Lyra's motion to establish the Committee of the Whole policy. When I put up my hand before even Trustee Lyra had suggested this as a motion, I was going to suggest that that it is, I think, incumbent upon us to ensure that there is an equity lens, and that a con that there is less diverse viewpoints is not a con, but is a non-starter. I think we have to ensure that there are diversity, equity, diversity, and inclusion perspectives on any policy committee. And I was going to suggest that SEAC and ACE should be on any such policy committee, or the trustees representing those committees should be on that. But I think it's even better. It's more, I think, likely that we will have a fulsome discussion if we have the whole Committee of the Whole involved in policy review. So although it is more work and it does require more formality, I think it is important, and therefore I support this motion.
Thank you, Trustee Kaplan-Murphy. Moving on then, next on my list, I have Seema Lamba for ACE.
Yes, you can hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Yeah, I actually support Trustee Lyra's motion as well. And I just want to point out, if it was through the ad hoc policy review committee, just in the alternative, and we didn't have the voices of the various other committees like ACE or SEAC or the Indigenous Education Committee, then when it came to COW, we would be limited in our input at that point. So I know I heard from one of the trustees saying, oh, no, it's going to come back to Cal and, they can have input there, but it's actually limited by the time it's already gone through a committee review to bring about those changes if there were some major issues. So I think it's better to do it, to have a policy committee of the whole and to have those discussions there with everybody's input in those discussions. I just wanted to point that out. Like I've been on Cal for a few years, and it has been difficult once a policy's already been drafted and revised, coming to Cal to really bring in meaningful changes. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Moving on to trustee Lee.
Thank you, ma'am. Oh, sorry. Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to speak against the change to the option 2. I believe based on what the staff have recommended that is a reasonable approach. I understand what Trustee Evans mentions with regards to having other community representatives on discussing policy, and I'm all in favor of that. My concern with the committee of the whole policy is that as a standing committee, it requires all the trustees to be in attendance. And given the packed schedule we already have and our recent, I would say, difficulties, especially given our retreat where we had only about half the trustees by the end of the weekend, having a standing committee requiring all the trustees to be present, or at least 50+1, could lead to issues with quorum.
Thank you for that. Next, I have as a first-time speaker, trustee Milburn.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. 2 questions. My first one would be, if we pass the ad hoc committee model, will there still be a standing item on the committee of the whole to talk about policy, or will it only be through meeting minutes?
Madam Director.
Sorry, I'm not sure I caught the last part. If we have the ad hoc committee, will there still be a standing?
Will there be a standing item for us to talk about policies and anything that's been discussed, or is it just going to be through the meeting minutes?
It would be bringing the recommendations to the committee of the whole. And I'll invite Superintendent McCoy to clarify that. But a couple of points I just want to make sure that we're clear on. And that is the application of an equity lens is applied equally regardless of these models. So I don't want anybody walking away thinking that there's an application one way and not the other. The other piece I would say is that in both cases, in both models, there is opportunity to have the non-voting reps engage before the policy gets to board for approval. What is different is the regular meeting cycle and the quorum and some of those structural pieces. And that does have some impact in several ways, but happy to respond. Superintendent McCoy, or Executive Officer McCoy, can you speak to the reporting piece?
Sure. Thank you, Director, and through you, Chair. As the Director indicated, all of the matters would come to Committee of the Whole as policies were being considered by the ad hoc committee through the minutes, and so recommendations would be considered when they came forward, as would other progress of the policy as it was being considered through the committee. And I did just want to highlight what the Director indicated is that under either model, it certainly wouldn't be our intention to limit opportunities for consultation with the advisory committees. I think if you look at the flowcharts that were provided, and we think about the tier 2 policy revisions that have occurred already this year, that certainly the input from the advisory committees would continue to be sought out through, for example, discussions at the advisory committees around different policy initiatives, so that the representatives, for 2 things, both so that their input could be considered as the policy was being developed, and discussed at the ad hoc committee, as well as through, as I think was indicated earlier, when things come to committee of the whole from the ad hoc committee, the non-voting reps would be present. So certainly was not the intention to in any way limit opportunities for input and consultation on policy work under either of the models.
Trustee Milburn.
All right, thank you for the response, and that actually answered my second question, so I can pass the floor. Thank you.
So you didn't have another question? I thought you had another question. Okay. So we're good. Moving on then, Tom Holloway from OCASC.
Yes, thank you. I would just like to say that OCASC would be in support of the motion presented by Trustee Lyra. Certainly agree with all the comments in favor, particularly Trustee Kaplan-Murth and her notion of Folsom and some of the stuff Seema Lamb mentioned. I think if we're not part of that, as you know, as these advisory committees, if we're not part of that original discussion, I think we sort of miss out on the sort of the breadth of that discussion. I think if it's something that's brought up, you know, for a vote, and it sort of seems to be rushed, seem to be rushed through, it seems like there's a greater likelihood that maybe a saleable point, you know, is ultimately missed. And then I would just add that, you know, if something substantive does come up, that it could actually, you know, take more time, because perhaps the right, you know, employees of the OCDSB aren't in the room to talk to a particular point, or if changes need to be made, it's now a matter of having to go back to this ad hoc committee and making further changes. So again, just like to say in support of Trustee Lyra's motion. Thank you.
Thank you. And next up, Suzanne Lyon for the Parent Involvement Committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Nice to be with you all this evening. Through you, I would like to echo some of the comments I've heard this evening. On behalf of PIC, I support the motion by Trustee Lyra. I also support the comments that Trustees Aziz and Kaplan-Murth made. And I don't think I need to elaborate on those. They were very clear and self-explanatory. So thank you for those comments. You know, as a retired policy manager, I'm very much aware and mindful of the fact that policy is where everything happens. It underlies every single thing the board does. It guides the way that we work towards student success and well-being. And as such, it's very important for the equity committees and I would say to toot our own horn for the Parent Involvement Committee to be at the table every step of the way when policy is being discussed and developed. It is very difficult to make changes after the fact, and it has been challenging sometimes for, I can only speak for myself, for me as the PIC representative, to feel that my interventions are having an impact, rather than just being speaking points that are very, very nicely and politely received, but I struggle sometimes to see how PIC's interventions play out in the long run. And I think even though the intent would not be to limit anybody's participation or involvement or input, that would be the de facto result. And so I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
And thank you for those comments. Are there any other first-time speakers among trustees? Trustee Presley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And through you, I'd like to move to close debate on this topic, if possible.
We have a motion to close debate. That will require, since I believe all of us are present, that will require, I believe, 8 to carry. So I will call the question. All those in favor of closing debate? And those opposed? And the motion is carried. There were enough to carry it. So that brings us to Trustee Lyra for wrap up immediately.
So I have been regaled of tales of the school board before I joined, back when we had a governance committee and a policy committee and an education committee and a number of other small committees. And I've been told that when we had all of these small committees instead of one committee of the whole structure, we would rehash long debates deep into the night on our individual committees. And then people would come to committee of the whole and rehash the same debate again. And it was a waste of everyone's time. And so I think if we have this committee of the whole model, we won't see that rehashing of debate time and time again. We will have a debate once, and then whatever decision has come to a committee of the whole will get passed to boards of recommendation. If we were to go with the other model and have us go through the ad hoc committee to committee of the whole, I see us hammering through the same debate twice, and that is a waste of everyone's time. I would encourage everyone, for the reasons outlined by other speakers, that we are going to lose some critical voices that we deem important. We're a board that believes in consultation. And so for those reasons, I would encourage all of my colleagues to support the committee of the whole policy model. Thank you.
So I will call the question on the motion which is before us, which is that the board establish the committee of the whole (brackets policy model) as set out as option 2 in report 23-025. All those in favor, please leave your hands up long enough that I can count them. And is Trustee Bell still with us?
Yes, I am. I'm voting in favor, Chair.
Thank
Scott.
you. Thank you. I can't see your face on the screen at the moment, so just let me count again. So I'm counting 6 in favor, and those opposed. And 6 opposed, and so the motion is failing on a tie. And do we have other speakers on this item? Trustee Blackburn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, I'd like to move the staff recommendation.
So moving the staff recommendation, which is already on our screen. Staff are being incredibly efficient tonight. That the board establish an ad hoc policy review committee as set out in Appendix D to report 23-025, and that it continue to meet until October 2024 or until the completion of the mandate. So would you like introduction, Trustee Blackburn?
I don't think at this point, Madam Chair, any is required.
Thank you. Speakers to the motion. Trustee Kaplan-Murphy.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. I cannot support this motion without an amendment, so I would propose an amendment that if there is a ad hoc policy review committee, that it must include members of SEAC, ACE, the Indigenous Committee, PIC. I mean, I suppose that would be a good start. I don't think that we are doing ourselves any favors by having a smaller committee. If you look back at the pros and cons, one of the issues that was raised was that there could be cliques, and I think we have seen evidence that our board is quite divided on many issues. If we don't have full representation from everybody who is currently a trustee, as well as from the members of our committees, then we are not doing justice to policy work. And the criticism that it would be more political I think is hollow because we are trustees. We are here as elected officials to represent our constituents. This is a political role. It is our job to monitor and amend policy. So therefore, any trustee who is not on that committee or any other equity-seeking voice that is not on that committee is going to leave our policy in danger of being shaped by people who do not share the same equity lens. I understand that equity is important to everybody, but I don't think that we see an equity lens in the same way. So I would ask that we have an amendment, and I'm not sure that I'd support it even with the amendment, but there would need to be an amendment to say that we need to have at the very minimum ACE, SEAC, and the Indigenous Committee represented on any ad hoc policy review committee.
So let me be clear. Are you moving an amendment or are you thinking of an amendment that you haven't got the words yet?
I'm moving an amendment. I don't exactly have the words, but I think the amendment would be something to the effect of that the ad hoc policy review committee must include in its membership representation from ACE, from SEAC, from the Indigenous Committee. I guess.
Pick.
I mean,
how about we do another 2-minute thing, sort out the words, and I'm wondering if it might be helpful also to get staff comment before we figure out the words, if there is any comment from staff, given that in the report it does make reference to some of the consultation pieces, but not a lot explicitly to getting input directly into either model, frankly. Madam Director.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. I think that it is useful to apply a broader governance lens to this deliberation and to think about how an ad hoc committee of this nature works. The value of the ad hoc committee model versus the committee of the whole model is in some respects the agility of the committee. You don't get caught. So if I think about the ad hoc committee on governance that we have used several times and had good success with, you might have 2 or 3 meetings, consecutive meetings in a row where you discuss an issue and navigate your way through, and there isn't the formality of this large structure. And then you might ask the staff to go away and they'll say, we need 3 weeks or 4 weeks or 6 weeks or whatever amount of time there is. And then you come back and you work through it. That's the beauty of an ad hoc committee, is there's more of a working element to it. In this kind of structure, we'll follow very much these kinds of structural rules. In both cases, we were very sensitive to the value of consultation, the value of applying the equity lens, the value of ensuring that voices of our non-voting reps were heard. It's just a slightly different piece. So the one thing that the ad hoc policy review committee approach gets at is actually a little more hands-on opportunity for trustees to engage in the discussion rather than it's a report just coming forward. I will ask Superintendent or Executive Officer McCoy to add any additional clarification about the working pieces. And then just as guidance in terms of the amendment, I think that the amendment could be dealt with as an additional clause, that is to amend the appendix in terms of membership to add those groups that were identified. Executive Officer McCoy.
I think the director has been pretty thorough in terms of her comments. So I don't have anything to add.
think I have the wording if you want it. I don't know if you want it now. So I would say that, that the committee membership should be comprised of, SEAC, ACE, the Indigenous Education Council, PIC, and OCAS.
So do we have language then for the amendment? Does that work, trustee Kaplan?
I think that works unless you want to make it a separate thing saying that membership of the committee shall be comprised of a minimum of and a maximum of, like you have already under membership, point
But
3.
by putting this with the addition of those representatives in the motion, that automatically means
fine.
that the mandate document would be changed without having to get into wordsmithing it.
That's fine with me.
Just wait your turn, please. So trustee Kaplan,
Yeah.
any further introduction or not?
I think, I mean, the further introduction is just that I think that this is the minimum that we should do if we're going to have an ad hoc policy review committee. I still think that it's going to, it's still a little bit top down instead of bottom up, but it's better than it would be without those representatives.
Thank you for that. And is this amendment friendly? And it's not. So speakers to the amendment? Who would like to speak to the amendment? Trustee Jenkins.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Trustee Kaplan-Meier. I am 100% in agreement of ensuring that we have an equity lens, and thank you to the director earlier for that clarification. Here's my perhaps misunderstanding. At the federal level and the provincial level, we have separate committees for each issue, each challenge. Federally, we have a veterans committee, we have a status of women committee, where they speak specifically to those issues for those stakeholders. And we invite stakeholders to speak at committee meetings. The committee meetings are very fulsome, they're robust discussions. So I'm not sure why we would not include any of these stakeholders in any of these ad hoc meetings.
Thank you, trustee Jenkins. Trustee Dixon.
Chair, sorry. Question. Whenever we have any meetings, aren't those committees allowed to come into our meetings to listen or to speak?
So the identified committees are non-voting reps at this table. So they are able to do that at any other public meeting. They are able to attend. In terms of ad hoc committees, the committee usually establishes some practice in terms of inviting others to participate. So I think to the previous speaker, if the committee was looking at a policy on a particular area of interest to any one or some of those groups, they could invite those groups and make it known. I think the other piece that's important to understand is we often have consultation with our advisory committees. And I don't think that either, any of these changes preclude the opportunity for an advisory committee to have a discussion on a topic. That's different from participating at the ad hoc committee. Like, there are different types of things because this is presumably a committee representative rather than the whole committee. So I just want to make sure everybody understands that piece as well.
Anything further, trustee Dixon? Moving on then, on the amendment, trustee Blackburn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to make a sub amendment on the amendment.
Go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Through you, so I think there's a compromise opportunity here. So we've heard from speakers that there is a significant concern about equity, and as my colleague trustee Kaplan Murph indicated, every trustee at this board at this table is very concerned with equity, diversion, and inclusion. So with that, I would see a compromise as being with the addition of IAC, ACE, and SEAC. And I see that as the equity seeking groups, and the mandate of PIC, we all know what that is, and OCASC, we know what the mandate of that is.
So basically your sub-amendment would be to delete PIC and OCASC from that list.
That is correct, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Is this sub-amendment friendly? And I'm seeing no discussion on the sub-amendment. Trustee Lyra?
So I think I understand where the sub-amender is coming from, but I think it would be foolish not to include the parent component or the school council component or the lens that they might bring to looking at our policies, because it's their schools and their kids who are going to be impacted by these policies. And so I'm not going to be supporting the sub-amendment because I don't understand why you would remove the parent perspective from our policy discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, trustee Lyra. Any further speakers to the sub-amendment? Seeing none, I'll go back to trustee Blackburn for wrap up on this sub-amendment.
Yeah, so the mandate of the Parental Involvement Committee is just that, getting parents involved in their children's education. OCASC represents school councils, and school council makeup is a very, very, very small percentage of parents. So for instance, I attended a school council meeting last night that has about 1,000 students in it. So that's probably close to at least 1,500 parents and caregivers, give or take. And there was 4 people there. So that is not that to me, and I've brought this up before, that's not substantial representation. Any of those people can come, and again, all these meetings would be open to the public. But that's my rationale. If I agree with the equity lens, I'm trying to be conciliatory and compromising, and I think that's a fair compromise.
Thank you, trustee Blackburn. So I will call the question on the sub-amendment. So the only thing we're voting on here is whether or not PIC and OCASC should be removed from that list. All those in favor of removing those 2 groups from the list? And those opposed? And online, trustee Aziz and trustee Bell? Are you opposed or in favor? You're muted.
Opposed.
Opposed.
And trustee Aziz is opposed. So the sub-amendment fails. And we are back to debate on the amendment. And the next speaker I have on my list is Seema Lamba from ACE.
Yes, I just wanted to add a few things to this. Like, obviously, I support this. I just want to point out that it's not to make a difference between when ACE members or other of the groups provide input, meaningful input, right? So if they're going to be meaningful input, then they have to be at the table and be able to influence that decision-making process. I've been at meetings of policies where we have given input and it was just said, but because, you know, for valid reasons, policies needed to be adopted, it wasn't incorporated. So this would give an opportunity for those lenses to be presented. And I just wanted to go back to the consultations with ACE and the other committees. So when we have policies come to ACE, so we heard what it is in theory, I'm going to tell you what it is in practice, because I'm there. So when it comes to us at ACE, we might get a presentation for about 20 minutes, 10 minutes, or have a discussion for maybe 10 or 15 minutes. And that's it. That's our input. We never get to see how our input has been incorporated until after the fact. And then I come to Cal because I am the ACE representative. That's when I would actually get to see it. So it's input, but we don't know if it's meaningful input. With this, we could see that it has meaningful input. And the last thing I just want to point out is that when I do as the ACE representative, when there are policies at Cal, I try to go back when I can, when I have time, if there's an appropriate amount of time, to get the ACE members' input as well. So when I come to Cal, I'm bringing the input of ACE members as a whole. That's my end objective. I don't always get to do it because of timing and when we get the policies to look at. So I just kind of want you to know, as an ACE representative on Cal, what I try to do, which is to bring all of ACE's input. Thank you.
Thank you. And moving on to Suzanne Lyon for the Parent Involvement Committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you to the other people in the meeting. I would like to strongly echo Seema's words. In fact, I was jotting down notes as I was waiting to speak, and every time she said something, I crossed it out of my notes. You know, I'm reminded of the phrase, nothing about us without us. And it seems crazy to me to want to exclude a significant membership component of the committees. And I understand that as a whole, they're called equity committees, but they're more than that. It's not just equity, it is parent involvement and OCASC as well. So I was really dismayed to see the sub-amendment proposed. I'm glad that it didn't pass.
We finished debating the sub-amendment.
Yeah, okay. So we don't often have a lot of opportunity to be consulted and provide input as well, as Seema mentioned. And I think it's important that take place. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to Trustee Bell.
No comments at this time. Thank you, Chair.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. It wasn't as distinct. So no comment, did you say?
I said no comments at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. And that brings me to the end of my speakers list on the amendment. So back to you, Trustee Kaplan-Murth, for wrap up on your amendment.
Thank you. I think it's already been said, and I'll just reiterate that I think that we need to ensure that our policies are informed by diverse voices, the addition of the Indigenous voice, of an equity committee voice, of the Parent Involvement Committee, of the Special Education Committee, and of OCASC is vital to ensuring that we have everybody giving direct participation in policy review. As has been said, that is a way of having meaningful impact at the table. It's also a way of ensuring self-determination, which I think is a key principle that we should be upholding. So I suggest this. I don't want to throw a spanner in the works, but I also wanted to suggest another amendment, which is that all trustees who want to be on this.
How
committee-
about we,
or we can do that
how
after.
about we finish with this
That's fine.
amendment before we start into another amendment?
Sure thing.
So if that's it on this amendment, I will call the question on the amendment that is before us on the screen, which would add to Part A with the addition of IAC, ACE, PIC, SEAC, and OCASC representatives. All those in favor? And opposed? And that amendment carries. And where were we on the time for trustee Kaplan-Meier? So you have 1:36 seconds left, so you should be able to propose another amendment.
So I just want to very quickly add that in terms of membership, rather than there being a maximum of 7 trustees, I suggest that we amend it to say as many trustees as would like to join this committee, because I think that's an important role that we play if we want to play it.
Thank you. I'm going to ask for staff comment on that because the issue of quorum is an important one, even for an ad hoc committee. And I wonder if they have any sage comments for us.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think that, in our original thinking and in the discussions we've had previously, one of the things we've recognized is how do we balance scenarios so that trustees who are interested in more in-depth policy conversations have an opportunity to participate, but all trustees are still part of the process, which was why one of the reasons why the ad hoc policy review committee model was attractive. If we increase the membership, and we have already expanded it, I think we need to understand the practical realities of that. In terms of an ad hoc committee, we're probably into this room because the size and structure of the committee, you're essentially creating a committee of the whole at this point without the federation representatives. And so if that's the will of the committee, that's the will of the committee. I think it's important to keep in mind that there were some recommendations in terms of the value of an ad hoc committee that these additions move us away from. So I'll leave it at that.
Trustee Kaplan-Meier. So the language for your amendment would be?
My language for the amendment would be that the committee shall be comprised of a minimum of 5 and as many trustees as commit to attending this committee as wish to do so.
I guess
I
one
don't
of the
know.
questions I have, in the past, we've had a process that established a quorum for a committee. So you knew how many people you absolutely needed to have there and who, is so that it could be a legitimate meeting.
Right.
However, it was possible for other trustees to attend and participate fully in the meeting if they so wished.
But they wouldn't be voting members of the committee?
In some cases, we've had it as voting member, as ability to participate and vote. That would be up to the board to decide. But if they weren't identified as members of the committee,
right,
they wouldn't have to count for quorum.
Right.
And if we only had 5 trustees show up and they were all the ones who were named to the committee, the fact that 7 other trustees weren't there would not mean that the 5 couldn't go ahead and have the meeting and do some of the work.
I understand. I'm assuming that anybody who put their name forward to be on the committee would show up, but I would be satisfied if we knew that non-committee members who are trustees would still be voting members.
So they wouldn't be, they wouldn't necessarily be members, but they could be, they could attend and participate, including voting, I believe. Madam Director?
I think that once the committee makes its recommendations, wherever you decide, we will need to take a look at the mandate between this meeting and board and come back with some more granular language so it's clear. So as long as you are making amendments that express your intent, we'll work with that. But you can, as the trustee indicated, amend the committee, so it would be 5 and up to 12 trustees. Or there can be amending language that is, retains it at 5 to 7 and says in addition that, all trustees who are interested may attend and may participate with full rights, or however it is you want to condition those rights. Keeping in mind that, as you make those changes, it changes the nature and structure of the committee.
So do you still, you still would like to make that amendment tonight, or would you like to leave it and bring it forward when this comes to board, assuming we have a recommendation for board?
I think it's really important that there is the ability for any trustee to be present and to have a voting ability on policy. So we can add that language as 7 and other trustees are able to vote if they are present, but are not required for quorum, if that is within our legislation.
And we will give staff a minute to get that written out here. And I'm looking at the hour, it's 8:45. I was going to call a recess shortly. Anyway, why don't we just have that recess now? So we'll have a 10-minute recess and then we will resume debate on this, and I hope move reasonably quickly.
Madam Chair, may I
and
just
into the rest.
ask staff to clarify something quickly, just so people are aware? So in my 12 years of experience, when we strike these committees, these meetings are held with during the day, which does affect people's decisions. Can staff clarify they would be during the day?
Well, I think that can wait until we reconvene. We are in
Okay.
recess now.
Okay.
But certainly that would be something that people should be considering. that staff have put, you will see on the screen in yellow, language that would effectively allow all board members to attend meetings of the ad hoc committee. Is that language work, Trustee Kaplan-Meier?
Yeah, that language is excellent. Thank you.
So the question then is, on this amendment, I didn't have a big speakers list. I think I had Trustee Blackburn and Trustee Aziz. But before I go to you, with this language, would this amendment be friendly? Is it okay? Is there any objection? Trustee Aziz, Trustee Bell, are you good?
All good.
And if everyone is in agreement and there's no objection, then the amendment is carried as friendly. Anything further, Trustee Kaplan-Meier?
No, thank you. That's all.
Thank you. Which brings us back to debate on the motion as amended. Is there any further debate on the motion as amended? Trustee Aziz.
Am I able to close the discussion?
To move to close the debate?
Debate.
You actually, on this motion, you had not spoken on the main motion. So yes, you would be able to move to close debate.
Thank you.
And I will call the question on the motion to close debate. All those in favor? And those opposed? And that motion is carried. So that brings us directly to Trustee Blackburn for wrap up.
None required, Madam Chair.
And if there is no wrap up, then I will call the question on the motion, which all of you can see on the screen, incorporating several amendments. All those in favor? And those opposed? And are there any abstentions? And the motion is carried. So that concludes item 8.1 and brings us to 8.2, report 23-027, approval of revisions to policy P.019.gov, Special Education Advisory Committee. Madam Director.
Thank you very much. You have the report before you. I'm going to invite Executive Officer McCoy to give you the overview of the report.
Thank you, Director, and through you, Chair, we are bringing forward for approval proposed revisions to policy P-019, Special Education Advisory Committee. The committee will recall that we did bring forward these proposed revisions for discussion at the March Committee of the Whole meeting. And essentially the revisions provide for a change to the membership in SEAC to add 2 representatives who would represent Indigenous students with special education needs. We also made some further revisions to the policy to better align it with the regulation, but which don't create any real substantive changes, for example, around the OCASC member. There was a concern that was brought forward at the March Cal meeting that because we had made some additional changes, whether or not it impacted on the OCASC representative at SEAC, and we just wanted to confirm and clarify that OCASC would continue to be able to have a representative as well as an alternate member. The real substantive changes to add the members. Wanted to indicate that these changes have been considered at both the SEAC by the SEAC committee as well as the Indigenous Education Council. And both, although I wasn't present, my understanding is that in both cases there was support for the revisions to the policy. The policy revisions fall within tier 2 in terms of our tiered approach, and so they're were considered in that vein, which means that, as I said, there was consultation with the two advisory committees that were directly impacted, as well as an opportunity was provided generally through the website and through our other regular communications to ensure that there was an opportunity for anyone else who wanted to provide input to do so. So we are looking for approval to the revisions as set out in the report and the appendix. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I've started a speakers list and I will start with Trustee Dixon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sorry, guys. I would like to move the recommendation that the revisions to policy P.019 govern Special Education Advisory Committee attached as Amendment A to report 23-027 be approved.
Thank you very much. Any introduction on that? No introduction. And I will go next to Dr. Maggie Mammon, who is here for SEAC. You're muted, so.
Yes, sorry, I
There
can't
you go.
see myself on the screen. Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, I have a comment and then I have a question. SEAC, we discussed this before we were aware of the budget proposals for this coming school year. So my comment is, first of all, that the conclusions from the research that's done on individuals who are Indigenous who have special education needs, the research tends to come up with exactly the same recommendations as we're always asking for through the organizations on SEAC for those of our constituents who are identified with learning disabilities, hearing impairments, and autism, and so forth, which are, first of all, for early intervention, early identification and intervention, for recognition of the needs of the children in a formal way through an IEP or an IPRC, and then sufficient funding to support the kinds of services that these children need. Now, given that we're going to now have 2 Indigenous representatives on SEAC, I'm assuming that they will be identifying more children with probably complex special needs, because we know that often that these groups have complex special needs. And so my question is, how does the board plan to support these additional students, given that the budget proposes to cut 30% of the primary special needs classes, which is where we can identify these students as they enter the system, and also they're planning to eliminate all of the learning resource teachers at the secondary level, where we know these students also struggle. So I'm wondering whether there's going to be some special funding allocated to the Indigenous students who are identified, and or whether the rest of our identified students with special needs are going to have access to that funding.
Thank you for the question, Madam Director.
Through you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the question. I guess I'll start by saying, although not germane to the policy amendments, I understand the concerns raised about how do the decisions made in academic staffing affect our ability to support students with special education needs, particularly Indigenous students. And to that, I would say, we made the academic staffing recommendations based on the areas where we felt we could best continue services and supports to meeting student needs, and still meet some of the necessary, or find some of the necessary savings. We will have to continue to work and think about where and how we support all students with special education needs in the context of the question raised. I think there's an assumption that the identified students may be students who require access to PSN classes. I don't think we have evidence to support that, but we did not reduce all PSN classes. We reduced 3 of 10, and we don't have a waiting list in that area. So, I guess I start with any savings or reductions will require some rethinking about how we meet needs, but it doesn't mean that we won't continue to do our best to meet those needs. And there is some funding that is provincial funding that's targeted for Indigenous education students, and we'll have to look at that. I'm not sure if Superintendent Simmons is here. If there's anything you'd like to add to that?
Thank you, Chair, and through you, sorry for the delay. I think there are a couple of other considerations in addition to the information that the director has shared. Certainly early identification intervention is a priority. The vast majority of students are served through regular classrooms, which would focus our attentions there for early identification, as well as a range of interventions that can occur at very young ages when we look at taking approaches such as universal design for learning and differentiated instruction. LSS is also currently working very closely with program and learning around early screening and some of those interventions, methods to identify and to intervene and provide supports for those students. In addition to much of the work that we've done around early reading moving forward. The plan moving forward is to continue to enhance our approach to supporting students that doesn't see them taken out of their community schools in the same way that they might have been previously by building capacity at the school level. The question also highlighted the reduction of all the secondary learning resource teachers. We don't have learning resource teachers at secondary, they're secondary learning support teachers for clarity. But the academic staffing report centered on the discretionary learning support teacher or LST sections that were offered to schools. We also continue to work ongoingly with program and learning and innovation adolescent learning to hone ways to try to support students at the secondary level, taking a look at the full complement of supports and services that they have, student success teachers and so on, in addition to learning support teachers. So those are some of the responses that I'd offer at this time.
Dr. Mammon, anything further?
No, thank you. I'm just a little curious as to the special funding for the Indigenous students. But I can follow that up at SEAC. Thank you.
Thank you. And moving on, Trustee Lyra.
I'd like to move to close debate.
We have a motion to close debate. That would be in order. So I will call the question on the motion to close debate. All those in favor? And opposed? And that motion is carried. So back to the mover. If Trustee Dixon, if you have any wrap up?
None required.
None required. So all those in favor of the motion that is on the screen to approve the revisions to the policy? And opposed? And that motion is carried. Thank you all very much. Moving on then to our next action item. This is a notice of motion regarding amendments to policy P.113.gov, Student Senate. And I look to Trustee Presley on behalf of our student trustee.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you. I won't take your time. I'm simply presenting this on behalf of the trustees who would be more than happy to provide introduction on this. I'll pass it over to student trustee Hope.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. The Senate is the official committee representing students' views to the board, and it's our main connection as student trustees to the student body and the student body's main connection to the board. Currently, the Senate is composed of one voting senator from each secondary and alternate site, and we meet once a month to discuss key issues happening throughout the district and in our schools. One of the largest issues with the current structure of the Senate is the lack of continuity. Over 70% of our senators are in the senior grade levels. It makes sense. If a school can only elect or appoint one senator, it will likely be a grade 12 student. However, what happens to senior students is that they leave. Currently, on a body of around 25, there are fewer than 5 returning students. Coupled with the fact that student trustees change every year, there is no continuity, there is no institutional memory, and the Senate essentially starts from scratch every single year. The implementation of the junior and senior senator model seeks to address this issue by ensuring that younger students are able to access opportunities within student voice and to continue to remain involved in governance during the years after. These changes will also increase representation. For example, adding liaisons from the Students' President's Council will better connect the Senate to individual schools, and adding representatives from student-led diversity groups in the district will allow the Senate to better understand the diverse needs and views of students in the board. Yes, these changes increase the size of the Senate. However, these increases do not add more of the same voices. Instead, they add voices that currently do not have a seat at the table at the Student Senate. I would also like to say that these changes were not made on a whim. In the process, consultations were held with 6 other school boards in the province, with the Student Senate, with the President's Council, and with student diversity group leaders from GSAs, BSAs, MSAs, all of whom expressed support for the proposed changes. Additionally, next year's student trustees have been actively involved throughout the process and are in full support of these changes. This motion also affords them some flexibility to make tweaks as they see fit once these changes have been operationalized. At the retreat on the weekend, we heard many people discuss the importance of student voice, student autonomy, and student agency. These changes are a step in that direction, and like how the new strategic plan hopes to advance the district, this restructure hopes to begin advancements in the systems that allow OCDSB students to have a voice in their education. Thank you, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you very much for that. Discussion on the motion or questions? Right now I have an empty speakers list. Trustee Lyra, Trustee Kaplan-Murth, Trustee Jenkins.
I am broadly, sorry, did you call me?
Go ahead.
I am broadly in favor of these changes. I think it adds, as was mentioned, institutional memory. It adds the ability for students to get engaged younger and to stay engaged, and it adds the ability for students to make sure that a diversity of voices are heard. I support all of the changes in the policy, and I'd encourage all my colleagues to do so.
And moving next to Trustee Kaplan-Murth.
I was going to move to close discussion, but I don't want to do that if somebody else has a question, so.
Trustee Jenkins.
I just wanted to, I appreciate and will be voting in favor of the recommendation. Certainly, we heard over the weekend at the retreat that student voice, student agency, that was a new word that we learned on the weekend. Student agency is so important, so I'm in favor of the motion.
And I still have Trustee Aziz and Trustee Blackburn.
I want to echo what my colleagues have said. I'm really impressed by the work of student members and excited to see other young people. Am I a young person? No. New generations of young people continue to be excited about civic engagement. And I think these changes are a great opportunity to do so. So thank you guys for bringing this forward. I can't see you, but I'm assuming you're there somewhere. Thank you guys for bringing this forward, and I'll turn my mic off.
Thank you. Trustee Blackburn.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'd like to commend the student trustees also. Excellent work, and I support this wholeheartedly. My questions are around the budget, and so I know that the superintendent that works with the Student Senate is here, and so could he, because I am quite concerned about the lack of resources that go to the Student Senate based on some interactions I've had last week. So could the superintendent please give an overview for the members of the board, what the nature of the current student budget is like? Student Senate budget.
Madam Director?
For you, Superintendent Laverne.
Oh, there we go. Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, we do have a budget to support the Student Senate. Those funds go to any extraneous costs related to any printing or extenuating travel costs that are required for students to attend the Senate. They also go to purchasing sweatshirts that say Student Senate on them for each of the student senators. Those expenses do exhaust our budget each year.
Okay, and it, yeah, and so I guess I know that I would like to see the Student Senate treated like most other committees in regards to snacks and food and stuff that's provided. And also, I am a bit concerned. I noticed that the budget would be co-established. Are there difficulties now in establishing the budget? And that could be to the student senator.
Well, I'll just offer, this is a starting point, and that is, I think the superintendent touched on the existing budget is expended annually, and we're talking about a doubling of the committee. So I think, there should be recognition that there is an increase in costs associated with this. And I think the other piece that we should be thoughtful about is that as we double the size of the committee, we have to think a little bit about what that means in terms of meeting spaces. And it may be that it's sufficiently meeting virtually, so it doesn't matter, but that's part of the reason why the recommendation speaks to reviewing after a year, because there will undoubtedly be some implementation issues that require some consideration. The student trustee may be able to clarify additionally.
I'll just say there are no difficulties per se with the budget the way it is. I think what the clause in the policy aims to get at is just to ensure that all parties involved on the Senate know what's going on in all regards.
Great. I'd like to thank the director and the student trustee for the answer. I'd also like to thank Trustee Kaplan-Murth for allowing those of us who wanted to make a comment to do so and not cutting off the debate. Yeah, so I'm fully supportive of this. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Trustee Blackburn, and that exhausts my speakers list. So who is doing wrap up?
I would be happy to bring that over to Trustee Al-Delaney. Before I do so, I am very thankful to our student trustees. I'm continuously impressed by you, and I'm looking forward to supporting this motion.
There we go. Thank you so much to everyone on the Board of Trustees for supporting us through this. And I don't think there's any wrap up needed. We hope that you support this motion. We really do think it will help improve student voice and student agency in our school board. And we look forward to hearing your thoughts.
Thank you. So I will call the question on the motion that the Board of Trustees adopt changes to policy P.113.gov Student Senate as outlined in Appendix A to this report or to the notice of motion, and that the Student Senate revisit the changes to the policy between September 23 and June 24 with the intent to make a recommendation on the changes, which is eminently sensible. So all those in favor? And opposed? And the motion is carried. Moving on to the next item on our agenda, We have some reports from statutory and other committees, beginning with the Advisory Committee on Equity from the 8th of February, 2023. Do we have a mover for that particular report? Trustee Kaplan-Murphy? Are there any errors or omissions in this report? Seeing none, I'll call the question on receipt. All those in favor? And opposed? Motion is carried. Next, we need a mover for the report of the Indigenous Education Council from 16 February 2023. Trustee Presley. Thank you. Are there any errors or omissions in this report? And seeing none, all those in favor of receipt? Opposed, and that motion is carried. And that now brings us to matters for discussion. Report 23-018, review of policy P.073.gov, board member code of conduct. Madam Director.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a short introduction before I turn it over to Executive Officer McCoy. There is a legal requirement to review the code of conduct on or before May the 15th and every 4th year thereafter. And I think Superintendent McCoy and Manager Guthrie have done a great job of bringing together a report that outlines some of the considerations and thoughts and practical issues that happen in other districts and how that might inform our thinking here. What is a little bit unusual in our case is the fact that this board did approve changes to the current policy, and those changes weren't to come into effect until an integrity commissioner was adopted, and we have an integrity advisor model. And so there's a question tonight in terms of what is the starting point for our review, and I will hand it over to Executive Officer McCoy, who can explain that more fully and guide you through the contents of the report.
Thank you, Director, and through you, Chair. As the Director indicated, we are bringing this forward for discussion on the basis that there is a regulatory obligation for school boards to review and affirm their codes of conduct by this May. So in that regard, the board can consider changes to the code of conduct and or affirm the existing code. As the Director indicated, in 2019, the board did approve revisions to the code of conduct, introducing the integrity commissioner model, but the policy is in a what I've referred to as a to be proclaimed status on the basis that an integrity commissioner has not yet been appointed. So one of the options, again, available to the board is to affirm that policy as approved by the board in 2019, but then move to appoint an integrity commissioner even on an interim basis while a more extensive process is undertaken to seek a longer-term integrity commissioner. The other option is to use that policy as a starting point and to look to see whether or not there are other revisions that the board would like to see to the code of conduct policy as it was revised back in 2019. In preparing this report, staff did consider codes of conduct from other school boards in the province, and in determining which codes we should look at, we did seek some advice from someone who has acted as an integrity advisor for this board. Asked her to identify, some of the boards that she would consider to be leaders in terms of the contents of their codes of conduct. We also considered boards who reputationally have dealt with these issues in an effective manner. And so we did look at, as the report indicates, the current codes of conduct for the Toronto District School Board, the Durham District School Board, and the York Region District School Board. And those are the three comparators that we specifically highlight in the chart that's in the report. We also looked at the codes of conduct from several other boards and haven't included those, but didn't see anything particularly different from the ones that we have identified. So I think it's important when we think about the code of conduct to think about it in terms of two parts. First is the code as setting out the expectations in terms of behavior and conduct on the part of trustees. And to that extent, whether or not the policy is comprehensive or whether there are gaps that should be considered in terms of clarifying, adding to or revising what's currently in the code of conduct when it comes to those expectations. And so, for example, we've identified through the chart some of the specific areas around expectations or behavior where the board may wish to look at revising some of the language based on what we see in some of the other codes of conduct. The other important aspect of the code, of course, is the enforcement of the code of conduct and the process that is in place to address concerns that arise with regard to whether or not there has been compliance with the expectations that have been set out and the manner in which those concerns are addressed. As we indicated, the policy as revised in 2019 contemplates the appointment of an integrity commissioner who would be charged with resolving concerns that come forward through a process that is not dissimilar from other complaints resolution processes and includes what we would expect in terms of an administrative fairness aspect. So ensuring that there is a comprehensive review, and then there is a report that comes forward from the integrity commissioner that includes and this differs from the version that is currently posted. The integrity commissioner would not only provide findings of fact based on their investigation, but would also make recommendations in terms of their view as to whether or not those findings amount to a breach of the code and what should flow from that. So again, looking at the process pieces, if there are any aspects of the current code which trustees feel should be reviewed or revised, then now would be the time to bring those forward. And staff would undertake efforts to reflect those revisions in a revised code. In terms of next steps, what we are hoping is that as a result of the discussion this evening around the report and some of the areas that have been identified for potential revision, that staff would have a sense of areas that do require, if there are any, some further contemplation in terms of incorporating them into the code and bringing something back to the board for consideration in the form of policy amendments. That would then be discussed and debated and ultimately approved by the board moving forward. So as indicated, we have identified in the report starting at page 4 and moving on to page 5, some of the areas where we had, again, based on a review of the codes of conduct from other boards, flagged that perhaps there was a gap or an area that the trustees may wish to consider in terms of making changes. And so would like to leave as much time as possible for a discussion among the committee in terms of some of those areas. We think, again, unless there is a view to moving away from the integrity commissioner model, one of the next steps that we would like to bring forward, as I indicated, is steps by the board to appoint an integrity commissioner even on an interim basis, pending a process for seeking out a more permanent integrity commissioner, or one who would be in place for a longer term. So with that, I did want to also acknowledge the contributions by Manager Guthrie, who played a significant role in bringing this report together, as did the policy analysts who work with us. With that, Chair, happy to try and answer any questions that may arise.
Thank you very much for the report. It is an important one and the timeline is tight, so I hope we get some good things out this evening. I have on my list right now, Trustee Aziz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to first thank staff for their work on this. I think this is really important, and I'm really grateful for the level of detail in terms of the comparative analysis. I think that's really helpful because it's easy to just kind of be in our bubble and understanding the context of our code of conduct. So I find it very helpful, and I appreciate that work. I kind of like a 2.5-parter question. My first question to Executive Officer McCoy, I believe you mentioned that you consulted with someone who had previously been an integrity commissioner. Is that correct? I just don't want to misquote you. Is that correct, through you, Chair?
Through you, Chair, that's correct. We did have an opportunity as we were preparing for the PD session on the Code of Conduct to make some inquiries of Suzanne Craig in terms of where she would suggest that we look for models.
Okay, fantastic. No, I just wanted to be clear on that. I'm thinking perhaps 2 steps ahead. So apologies if I am jumping forward. In thinking about updating our code of conduct, I'm grateful for the comparative approach. And when thinking about some of the pieces that other boards have that we don't, I think of the unique circumstances faced by our board. For example, I think about the one of the pieces that other boards have, which include the option for members of the public to put forth a code of conduct concerns. And to me, that raises a concern specific to our board, where we have seen a disgusting amount of vitriol shown towards one of our trustees. And my concern is, if we were to adopt that policy section, for example, that it would be disproportionately against one trustee or another, given public opinion or conversations, etc. So my question to staff in thinking about next steps is if we could go back to the integrity advisor and Executive Officer McCoy or directors who might be able to let me know if this is possible, to go back to the integrity advisor and consider the unique situation of the board as it exists today, and consider that when incorporating revisions and the code of conduct update, and perhaps for the sake of new trustees as well, in that recommendation and report to the board, provide examples of the consequences of what that code of conduct, those code of conduct revisions look like, as new trustees were interacting with this for the first time, and so seeing kind of examples of what recommendations are included in the code of conduct, I think would be helpful for us to understand the implications. Is that possible? Oh, timer. Is that feasible?
Director?
I'm not sure if I fully understand the question. I understood that you wanted us to go back to the integrity advisor and also to look at other examples. And I appreciate the concern about what our experience has been and what how that might impact members of the community in terms of filing complaints under the code. So I would say 2 things. One, to answer your question, I think I need you to clarify. And 2, just to point out that in the report, we did suggest that there be some discussion around whether complaints from the public come through the code of conduct or through the complaints policy, and then what are the right mechanisms for investigating that. But I'm not sure if that fully answers your question, because I missed something.
It's okay. I'll go back. Thank you for trying to answer my question. My kind of maybe it contradicts my earlier point that I'm grateful for the comparative approach that the staff have brought forth in assessing our code of conduct. And with that in mind, with what the other boards are doing in mind, can we either, I mean, it's possible that staff have the knowledge and experience to have this kind of assessment on their own, but in speaking with the integrity advisor, seeing what other boards have done, are those, policy pieces like the complaint process or the code of conduct process in the context of the board, are those revisions helpful in our context? Or are they a more of a hindrance in our code of conduct policy? Should we update it X, Y, and Z? Does this make sense? And my question about examples is just to provide trustees a better picture of how a revision to the code of conduct would play out. To provide examples for new trustees. Is that clear as mud?
I'm going to look to Executive Officer McCoy.
Through you, Chair, I'll attempt to answer what I think the questions are. We did around that particular aspect of the, when we looked at other codes of conduct and identified that they provided access to bring forward concerns beyond trustees, so to staff and to members of the, and so did have an opportunity to discuss that with the integrity advisor. And I think, again, no surprise indicating that I think we could anticipate, if that was the direction the board decided to go, that there would be an increase in the number of concerns that came forward. I think it is, I appreciate the context piece that the trustee has raised, and I think that is an important consideration and maybe something that the board will consider in terms of whether to move in this direction or not. But if the board did move in that direction, I think could anticipate that there would be an increase. I think that's where it also, the board would need to rely on the integrity commissioner as being the able to sift through concerns. I think there is a provision that would allow the integrity commissioner, for example, not to consider or review or investigate complaints that were, for example, considered to be trivial or vexatious or malicious, where on the face of them didn't indicate a breach. And so I think that would be the role of the integrity commissioner, for example, to be able to discern complaints that were that raised a legitimate concern and those that were brought forward for nefarious purposes. And again, we raised it because it was something that stood out to us when we looked at other boards. And again, I think there are other boards that at different times have had similar challenges or similar contexts. I think certainly across the province we're seeing some concerns being brought forward in terms of some of the behaviors that are happening in terms of challenges around being able to conduct meetings and some of those things. So I think, there are other boards that have faced somewhat similar challenges, if perhaps not as extensive as ours. But at the end of the day, it's really, again, and why we tried to frame the guiding questions this way is whether or not the changes that might be proposed would, increase public confidence in the board, whether or not they would, and in the code of conduct itself, whether or not they would clarify the standards of conduct for trustees, and whether or not they would just improve the board effectiveness overall. And so I think those are considerations that the board would need to have as you decide whether this is a direction to move in. And as the director indicated as well, we have a complaints resolution policy already, which when we review it does apply to the board and to members of the board. And so if not through the code of conduct, I think we do need to examine some of our other policies that apply to the board and ensure that we are clear on what the processes would be in the event that concerns were brought forward through those policies, whether it's the complaint resolution policy around members of the public, for example, parents, students, others bringing forward concerns, whether it's the respectful workplace policy when it comes to staff. So I think if not making a change here, we just need to ensure that that those other policies can be implemented in the way that they were intended and are currently written.
Thank you. Go ahead. Sorry. No,
Follow-up
please.
question. That's an area where we might be able to look at how other boards have navigated those pieces. So where they have complaint policies or respectful workplace policies, how have they navigated the trustee process in those? And that might get at your question in a different way.
If I may, Chair, just to really clarify and perhaps, excuse my language, dumb down my question. My question is, when staff bring forward their recommendations to the board on a revised code of conduct policy, could we include, for example, in the comparative table that is presented to the board tonight from pages 2 onward, 2 to 3, there is the different boards that are being compared, but could we include a so what column? So if, for example, the board updated this policy, what would be the implications? Would staff be making complaints through a complaint process instead of code of conduct, or would there be a code of conduct process, and therefore would there be an integrity commissioner that would need to be hired, just to really make it crystal clear what, like Executive Officer McCoy mentioned, if the policy or amendment would just increase our effectiveness as a board in terms of the code of conduct change or policy language revision, or if there would be much more long-term concrete steps that the board would have to update other policies and consider next steps and kind of longer term. Again, as new trustees, I think this would just be very helpful because sometimes the policy language can be a bit muddled for folks.
And you're out of time, trustee.
Thank you.
So I would like to move on, and I would like to ask people to be as succinct and clear as they possibly can be, because this is something that requires discussion. But I'd like to make sure that everybody who has some comments on it has an opportunity to be heard. So next I have trustee Lyra, then trustee Kaplan.
So from the top of the document, I would be okay with a provision for trustees to be able to consult with senior staff about whether or not something is confidential or not, which is seen in 3 of the districts, but not ours. I don't think an elaborate list of gifts is necessary. I think the policy that we have on gifts now is pretty reasonable. I don't think creating a list is going to be able to cover all the edge cases that you need. I have no problem adding conduct regarding current and prospective employment to the expectations that trustees not use their position to try and gain employment at the district. That's an entirely reasonable addition to me. I did have concerns about opening up the code of conduct process to include all members of the public. I think it's entirely reasonable to open it up to senior staff, to say that if a senior staff person or a trustee or a student trustee has a concern with a trustee's behavior, that they can file a code of conduct complaint. I think opening it up to the public is going to get very expensive very quickly. We hire an integrity commissioner on a retainer, which is like a set number of hours per year. And if we exceed that, we start paying a lot of money. And so I'm of the opinion that we don't want to just open it up to the public carte blanche. I think that trustees can take complaints from the public, and if they think they have merit, then they could bring that forwards. Or I think that the senior staff in their regular interactions with trustees should be able to bring those kinds of complaints forwards. But I also have concerns similar to Trustee Aziz's about opening up to the public carte blanche. I had no problem adding reprisal and obstruction to the expectations that trustees not engaged in that behavior. Ditto with acting advice on the integrity commissioner or remedial actions recommended by the integrity commissioner investigations. So I think those are all excellent additions, with the one exception being the opening it up to the public writ large. So that's all of my feedback as quickly as I could. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Kaplan-Murray.
Thank you, through you, Chair. So I have a question for the board, which is in this comparative chart, what we don't have a sense of is how many code of conducts have been brought forward by members of this board, let's say over the last 12 years, I have reason to believe that we might be somewhat higher than other boards, but I would like to know how much that is true. How many codes of conduct have been brought forward? How much has that cost the board? And how many of those code of conducts were deemed in the end nefarious or vexatious or unfounded? I think that that's important. I don't know if we have access to information in terms of the other boards and how that compares, but I am concerned with code of conduct being inappropriately used by the OCDSB in order to silence specifically progressive voices. That being said, I also, obviously, elephant in the room, agree very strongly with what my colleagues have said in terms of the possible repercussions of opening up code of conduct to the public. And I think that's quite clear why that would be, and I could not support that.
Do we have a response from staff in terms of numbers?
I don't know that Executive Officer McCoy would have them immediately available. And that's in part because the goal of the code of conduct process is to resolve informally. First informally between members and then informally through the chair. And if not through the chair, then with the assistance of an integrity advisor. So we'd have to think about that data. I can tell you as someone who's, I think, been involved in all of them, I can't think of, I don't want to say any that were formally deemed vexatious versus worked through, like that hasn't been the practice. But we could take a look at the total number and see if we could give you that. I'm not sure, given what we know, that our numbers are that different from other boards, but we'll take a look and see what information on volume of complaints is available. It's just not a straightforward number, and given the confidentiality provisions, it will be hard to confirm some of those, particularly the comparative piece.
Next, I have Trustee Blackburn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And through you, I agree with what my colleagues have said. I do not in any way want us to open this up to the public. And to speak to Trustee Kaplan-Murr's last question, I mean, there's, because of the nature of the code of conduct and confidentiality, I can't address what she has said or asked. But I know the answer. A lot of what she's asking, I know the answer to, unfortunately. What I would like to bring my point of view to the board is I think we absolutely need to appoint an integrity commissioner, and as soon as possible. The reason why I argue this is because we need to take the politics out of it. And we need to take the decision, we need to take a decision, the decision out of the hands of a colleague, mainly that the power that the current code of conduct gives to the chair. And whereas the integrity commissioner is always objective, and that's what we need. That will add integrity to our process. It will add an extra layer of fairness to the process, and I think it will put us in better stead with members of the public about our process. So my question through you, Madam Chair, to the director or to any staff who would choose to answer it, do I need to bring that forward by way of motion to appoint as is in the report?
I'm going to give that to Executive Officer McCoy.
Through you, Chair, as indicated in the report, we feel that if the board through this exercise continues to feel that the integrity commissioner belongs as part of the code of conduct, and that certainly was the the outcome of the policy review 4 years ago, then our feeling is that we should move forward with the appointment of the integrity commissioner so that that policy can be implemented. And so we were in staff's discussions looking at bringing forward a recommendation around that. So I don't think there's a need for an individual trustee to bring it forward. It would come forward as part of a staff recommendation.
And do you have a timeline for that, executive officer?
So given that this policy needs to be affirmed by mid-May, that it would be following that action by the board.
Good. Well, I'm very hopeful that when that recommendation is brought forward and has been brought forward in a very thoughtful way, that it is in fact supported.
Thank you, Trustee Blackburn. My next speaker is Seema Lambda for ACE, and then I have Trustee Lee, Trustee Jenkins, and if I can reserve a spot for myself, I would very much like to speak to this one as well. So not trustee, Seema Lambda for ACE, please.
Yeah, so I actually agree with many that have said, you know, we don't want what we would call the floodgate of complaints. That would be trivial. So I was wondering if the 4.12 in the policy that was given to us could be looked at to add something that would include, you know, complaints that go against the values or principles of the board or something like that. So like beyond it being just trivial and frivolous and the threshold for that, because I do think it's important for the public to not be silenced and have an ability to file a complaint against trustees. I know I'm not a trustee as I speak of this, to be able to do it, whether it be here or whether it's through the other complaint process. It makes sense for it to be here because it's a code of conduct and it has an integrity person here. So it would make sense to have that through here. I think it would be silencing valid complaints if there isn't a complaint process for them. And it's rather than silencing them, it's better to probably look at 4.12 or some area around there to make it such that we don't get the kinds of complaints that is being discussed. So that's all I'm going to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those thoughts. Moving on to Trustee Lee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Quick question for the staff with regards to. Thanks. Quick question for the staff with regards to the current framework with the integrity advisor. As I understand it, the advisor can only make findings of fact, and the adjudication of the actual breach of code of conduct falls upon the trustees versus a commissioner has the authority to make that final finding of whether a breach has been done. Is that correct?
Shortly, yes, but executive officer.
So through you, Chair, that is a significant difference between the policy that is currently posted and the policy that was approved in 2019, appointing the integrity commissioner. So under the current policy, Trustee Lee's assessment is correct that the investigator or reviewer makes findings of fact, which are presented through a report, and then it's the board that determines whether there's been a breach. Under the revised policy, the integrity commissioner would go further than that and would actually bring forward in the context of their report whether or not, in their view, the findings of fact constituted a breach of the code as it's written.
Thank you, Executive Officer. In that case, I very much support the idea that we should appoint an integrity commissioner. Being an adjudicative body and a political body as trustees is a very difficult hat to switch. And I definitely would not want us going forward to be put into that position. Having the recommendation from a commissioner is definitely highly preferred.
Thank you. Next, I have Trustee Jenkins.
Thank you, Chair. I'm also in favor of appointing a integrity officer as soon as possible. And I also share concerns about opening it up to the public while the public's voices are important, they can certainly contact us through email, by telephone, or presenting as delegation. And at the end of the day, on election day, their voices can be heard loud and clear by their choices on that day. So I am not in favor of opening up to the public in general.
Thank you, Trustee Jennings. I don't have any other first-time speakers on my list, and I'm going to ask Trustee Jennings if you wouldn't mind taking the chair for a moment.
I can.
Because I would like to speak.
Go ahead, Trustee Scott.
Thank you very much. I've probably had more experience with the Code of Conduct than anybody, mostly because of having to deal with multiple issues involving inter-trustee conflicts and complaints, most of which were able to be resolved informally, but a few of which did go into a formal process, which required contracting with external people to do investigations, or then we set up the system of the integrity advisors. I think the only thing that gives me pause at all about having an integrity commissioner, because that would be a position with more power, would be to be absolutely sure that in the legislation, because I've looked at a lot of different boards' practices with regards to code of conduct complaints, the legislation is very clear that the board determines whether or not there has been a breach, and then what the appropriate sanction would be. If we had an integrity commissioner, would we in fact be able to delegate that duty of formally finding that there was a breach? Or would we have to simply have the integrity commissioner able to recommend to us that there had been a breach, and we would still be the ultimate decision makers on that? Because I think on the one hand, it's very hard being in that adjudicative role, but at least with a strong recommendation, a clear recommendation from an integrity advisor, that would make the board's task much simpler. So answer from staff, please.
Executive Officer.
Through you, Chair, there is a distinction that the decision around whether it's a breach does remain with the board, that the integrity commissioner would make a recommendation based on their findings as to whether there's been a breach of the code, but it would still be up to the board whether or not to accept that, in the same way that the integrity commissioner could make recommendations regarding appropriate sanctions if they, to go and to coincide with their recommendation around a breach. But at the end of the day, those powers are vested in the board and cannot be delegated to someone else to make those decisions.
Thank you. And the timer kept going while I was getting the answers. So if I may continue for just a moment longer. One of my biggest concerns about the code of conduct is the fact that around the table, not just this board, but previous boards, most people have not really paid very much attention to most of it, except to the part about going and making a formal complaint. I think it's really time that we started to focus on the behavior aspects that are listed in the first part. And remember that different people may receive things that are said or done in different ways, and make a serious effort to try to use the code of conduct not as a weapon, but as a means of seeking mediation if necessary to resolve differences. As soon as it starts to be weaponized, I think it starts to be a failed concept. And so I really hope that if we could appoint an integrity commissioner, and if we could, all of us, focus very much on the expectations for behavior, as opposed to how we can use the code of conduct to punish somebody for doing something that we don't view as being quite right. I think we would be well served by this. And I have mixed feelings about opening it to the public. I'm not greatly in favor of that. But there's still a few things I'd like to check out. Thank you.
Back to you, Chair Scott.
Thank you very much. Other first-time speakers, any? If not, I have second-time speaker, trustee Lyra and trustee Blackburn.
So one thing that we didn't have a chance to discuss is the maximum possible sanction allotted under the code of conduct. Our code of conduct has a cap on what we can ascribe to a particular violation. And I've spoken with some trustee chairs around the province, and they have higher caps in their code of conduct. And I'm wondering if any consideration has been given to increasing the maximum possible sanction for a gross violation of the code of conduct to staff.
I guess my first question would be, and it doesn't have to be in the moment, but I'm happy to look at what those other boards have and what that language is. I'm not sure where the difference would be, except in maybe interpretation, because our provision is rooted in the Act. And maybe Executive Officer McCoy has come across something additional in the research she's done. But our decisions or our parameters for sanctions are based on what's in the legislation, not based on a policy decision of the board.
Through you, Chair, I haven't come across anything different, but to be fair, I haven't gone specifically looking for that particular aspect. So that is something that we can take a further look at. But my understanding is the same as the directors, that we are aligned with the what's permitted. We'll take a closer look.
I believe it was Hamilton who suspended a trustee until they completed professional development, which was like a multi-month, if not in the rest of the term, suspension, which is above the maximum prescribed in our set of rules. And so if we could look into that or look into the language they used to have that kind of option available to them, that would be beneficial. Thank you.
Thank you for that. York Region also in one of their earlier major code of conduct things also, I believe, significantly exceeded the provincial legislation in terms of the sanctions applied.
It might have been York Region. It might not have been
Which is
Hamilton.
questionable. So with that, moving on to trustee Blackburn.
Yeah, I mean, the notion that a board would go against the ministry regulations is unacceptable to me. The other thing is sorry I didn't bring this up when I just forgot about it. I would like to see it's E, I don't know what number it is, but clarify and confirm the application of the code to social media and other forms of communication. We, this board and the last board had significant issues over how we conduct ourselves on social media. So I think it's important to do that. And of course, that would apply to emails and how we conduct ourselves in the community, et cetera, et cetera. And I would also like to point out that our current code of conduct actually the actual process does not respect the natural rules of the rules of natural justice, and that is a big problem, and I think it needs to be addressed, and because it opens us up to potential situations of judicial review. Now, the problem with having to go to judicial review, and I would have gone to judicial review on one occasion had I been a very wealthy woman, which I'm not. And that's another problem with our code, is that when the board does investigation, and part of the problem with having it in the hands of the chair is, and it's not just this, it's other, this is not specific to this board, but other boards, and don't forget, this is my fourth board, that the chair has significant access to legal advice that the chair doesn't have to pay for, and any trustee who is accused of doing something isn't necessarily guaranteed legal advice. In my particular case, I was able to access pro bono advice, but that's just because of I happen to know a lot of lawyers who like me. But that might not be the
Trustee
case for everybody
Blackburn, I
else.
think
So-
we're starting. to
Yeah,
get
but
pretty
I'm just
deep in
saying the
weeds here.
code needs to respect the rules of natural justice, and it needs to be fair to everybody, and it's not.
And is it essential, trustee Myra? This is a third time speaking. Go ahead.
So one of the things that Executive Officer McCoy said is that the board cannot delegate its authority to another group. We delegate all kinds of our authority to all kinds of people. Can you double check that we don't have the ability to delegate our authority on this issue by express motion to an integrity advisor or an integrity commissioner?
I can do that.
Thanks. Because I think that would be very useful to know if it was an absolute cannot or just has not been done before. Thank you.
I think it probably goes to the language that is explicitly used in the act. And in this case, the language was pretty explicit. So if there are no other comments, if people have additional thoughts on this, could we send them to you by email? Thank you, Executive Officer. And with that, we are going to have a few minutes to get to the strategic planning presentation, the consultation report, report 23-029, and I will call upon the director.
Thank you very much. I'll be brief, given that the hour and the fact that committee members have had a chance to look at this. And also acknowledge Strategic Business Officer Andrea Rahim and Manager Stacy Kay and Policy Analysts. I'm going to say his name wrong because it's not written in front of me. Kenan Obergemar. Andrea, yeah, I mentioned Andrea. It's the policy analyst I want to acknowledge who've been working with her. So we undertook an extensive consultation on the strat plan, and the report in the agenda package gives a fulsome overview, and it identifies 6 emergent themes. And those themes were learning, well-being and belonging, teaching, school and classroom environment, curriculum and programs, and board and admin. And in the report, it works through those themes and the nature of the feedback, and I don't need to read that to you. What I thought was interesting to highlight was our reflections on this consultation and some of the learning we had. So you'll recall that we arranged for the one-to-one conversations and invited members of the community to reach out and request an interview with either a trustee or a member of the senior team. We had small group conversations that allowed us to hear from partners and organized groups. So all of our advisory committees, as an example. We had some large group meetings where anyone in the community could attend and participate in conversation that way. And we had electronic feedback, which allowed people to participate without coming in to a meeting. And we also had a series of school-based consultations in targeted school communities where students, parents, and staff were able to participate in those consultations. And what this did was allow us to explore some different ways of engaging and learn a little bit about the different types of feedback we get through different processes. And so one of the side benefits of this is we'll be exploring some of those pathways for future use and thinking about what kinds of consultation best meet best meet the item that we're consulting on. as I said, the trustee members had an opportunity to talk through some of this report, but I encourage you all to look at it. As we went into our retreat this weekend, we really built a process around the consultation feedback and focusing our conversations on that, reflecting on that, and building a path forward based on those emergent themes. As members know, there's still work for us to do. But what I think was really important was the fidelity we brought to this feedback. And, you know, we talked earlier in the policy process about the value of hearing from many voices and making sure that those voices know that we are listening and know that we are reflecting on what they had to offer and know that our decision-making is informed by what they have shared. And what is great about this document is it brings together the themes from quite a mix of consultation pathways, but also it laid an excellent foundation for informing the development of our plan. And my appreciation to all of you for your contribution to that and to our ongoing discussions in that respect. So I'll pause there. I don't know if there are members who have questions, but happy to take any.
Are there any questions for the director? Bearing in mind that many of us had already had an opportunity to review this report on the weekend. And if there are none, I would like to say on behalf of all of us, thank you very much to Andrea Rahim and Stacy Kay and all of the other people who worked so hard to put this report together. I think this is probably the broadest, best consultation we've been able ever to have in my experience as a trustee with regard to the kinds of things we need to consider as we build the next strategic plan for the district. So thank you very much for presenting on their behalf tonight. And I will move on to the next item on our agenda, which is the report from the Ontario Public School Boards Association. Trustee Jenkins, anything for public report?
None this evening.
Thank you. Moving then to the OSTA update, Ottawa Student Transportation Authority, Trustee Lee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be brief. The Ottawa Student Transportation Authority has been working through its working group to address operational issues within the system. In discussions, the working group has narrowed its focus to 3 primary areas, which include the implementation of GPS and internal cameras on buses to support student safety, a longer strategic plan work item of a system-wide bell time review, as well as a investigation on limiting the part-time usage of the transportation system versus 5 days a week. In other words, students and caregivers need to make a decision of whether they will use the bus or not, and not on a ad hoc basis. The other aspect that was discussed at OSTA is the draft agenda. Draft budget. The current draft budget in maintaining the current levels of service due to given the lack of new drivers in the system is that the impact to the OCDSB transportation budget is about an 8% increase for next year.
Thank you for that report. I'm not sure that I should thank you for the report on the increased cost. We have a question from Trustee Lyra.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. Can you expand a little bit on what families who don't work a 9 to 5 and who can drop their kids off or have to get transportation some days a week, but cannot because they are working shift work, for example, the other couple of days a week, are expected to do if we are not offering some fraction of a full transportation?
Through you, Madam Chair. So the intention, at least currently with the budget process, is that the MTC program will be reinstituted next year. But specific to Trustee Evans's question, the intent is not to be restrictive in that aspect. It is to, there are various caregiving situations, such as split students that split homes for split parents or whatnot. So those would be addressed as they currently are. The intent is to focus on parents who block off a seat all year and use the bus once a week or maybe once every couple weeks as a just in case situation rather than as a consistent usage basis.
Thank you.
Trustee Nash.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and through you. When you mentioned the GPS and camera, which are very good initiatives, something I hear from parents is the communication aspect and the possibility of an app, which parents can then see where their bus is, because that's been a major concern. I mean, parents understand there are delays and there are shortages and so forth, but the biggest complaint is not knowing. And so certainly we have the technology and apps are very useful. And so is there a thought of providing that type of detail? And
that is specifically what the GPS program is meant to, at least currently envisioned to, is for parents to be able to see where a given bus is at any given time.
Thank you.
And I'm not seeing any other hands, so that brings us then to new business. Is there any new business? Trustee Lyra.
This is a heads up to all trustees that we're going to be discussing our delegation process, our bylaw review delegation process at the next board meeting.
Thank you for the heads up. Any other new business? I am not seeing any. We have reached the end of our agenda and I declare this meeting adjourned.